Didn't make it tonight. Okay. So I'd like to welcome you all tonight to our presentation about the
I hope you can hear it. I got it. I don't, it doesn't have great volume. I got it at maximum volume.
Manager and Mid-Island Coordinator for the BC Community BAT Program. And in addition, we'll be giving a presentation about that and answering any questions you may have. Okay, are we all right? But then we have. And then we have John.
Unmute it. No, that's for your muting.
Maybe I have to go on video.
Where's the volume? Just the volume.
The volume's up here. Okay, I got it.
Okay, so my name is Linda Brooymans. I'm the stewardship manager for the Nanaimo Area Land Trust. And I've also recently become the Mid-Island Regional Coordinator for the BC Community BAT Program, which is a province-wide program that seeks to engage community members in BAT conservation and stewardship. And the reason why that is done is because there is so much data that is lacking on bats in BC that there aren't enough biologists and students to collect all that data. So, so what they've decided to do is ask the public to, can you fix this? It's really distracting.
You waiting for me? Just lost them.
Okay. Yeah, I've muted them. Yeah.
We've never done this. Everyone is muted except not muted.
There, okay. Solved. Phew. That would be really, really hard to make a presentation of that. Okay, how do I get rid of this now? All right, and how do I move this? How do I move that way? Okay. Yeah, so the public has a lot that they can contribute in terms of our understanding and the sort of baseline knowledge that and data that we have on bats in different communities. And that is why the BC Community BAT Program was launched, I think maybe 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And the Mid-Island region was lacking a coordinator. There is Tim Ennis in the Courtenay-Comox area, and then there was the Habitat Acquisition Trust group that was working South Island. So they just said, do you want to do this? And I said, sure, because I had done a little bit of bat stewardship in Nanaimo proper. So I thought, sure. So I've been doing this for about a year, mostly organizing bat counts and trying to connect with the public in terms of what they know about bats in their communities. And I'm pretty sure that Nanoose and Cedar are hotspots for bats in terms of where there's a higher density of bats. But we're just looking to confirm that, and that's where the public can help. Okay, so here I go. Okay, so understanding the uniqueness of bats. I think a big part of the job for this position that I have is connecting with the public and trying to deal with some of the misunderstandings and the stigmatization of bats, just based on popular culture and a lot of sensational reporting, and some common misconceptions that the public has based on that, but also just based on common sense ideas and our views on what a bat looks like and what that means it is. So what is a bat? Ooh, that's really dark. Let me see if I can make that a bit brighter. I can't. Sorry. Okay, so I will read off what it says there for those of you who can't read it. Bats are the only mammals capable of true flight, something that might be kind of obvious, but because of that, they have a separate evolutionary history to a lot of other mammals. They sort of branched off 50 million years ago, and based on that, it's partly due to their having evolved the ability to fly, created all kinds of other physiological changes. And there are actually over 1,400 known species worldwide, which is the second largest mammalian order after Rodentia. So if you think about it, they've branched off so long ago, they have all these unique sort of little offshoots in terms of their evolution. In Canada, though, there are only 20 species that are known to inhabit all of Canada, but in BC, we have 16 of those 20. So that's actually quite a large diversity, considering that all of Canada holds 20 and we have 16 of those 20. Bats, like other mammals, have live young, so that's called viviparous. And most females only have one pup a year, which is a very low reproductive rate. And when you're considering conservation, that's actually really important to consider. It takes bats a couple of years before they are ready to reproduce. And they only have one pup a year. They can live to be 30 or even 40 years old. I think the oldest bat that has ever been reported was 42 years old in France. But the average, I think, for most of the bat species here is about 12 years. But another thing we don't know, because that kind of research is really challenging to carry out. So what are some of the myths that I'm hoping to deconstruct for most of us? Number one is that bats will destroy my attic. I've had many phone calls. I think this is the most common phone call that I get. So there's a BC community bat phone number, and there's a website, and people can submit their concerns and questions. And I have to field these calls for our area. And it's because people have bats in their attic and they're really concerned. They think they're dirty and they just want them out. And that's because they think small, furry, brown things that they're a lot like a mouse or a rat, but they aren't. Oh, it's so dark. Anyways, okay, they are not at all. They are not able to chew, unlike a rodent who has these teeth that grow constantly. It's because they use those teeth to gnaw roots and nuts and all kinds of things. Bats do not have those teeth. If you could see this picture, you could see this little guy has really sharp incisors and canines, and he has almost no front teeth at all. He cannot chew anything. They can't gain access to spaces. They can crawl through holes that already exist, but they can't, you know, if they're in your attic, they're not going to gnaw on any cables. They're not going to destroy the structure of your home. They're just going to use the space to chill during the daytime, more or less quietly, depending on how many you have. Yeah, and that's all they need really, is a quiet space that protects them from predators. And the reason why some species really like to be in an attic or a barn is because of the temperature has less variation during the day and the evening. So it's actually a better place for them to do things like raise their pups. So that's one myth. Bats are not rodents. so they can't gnaw and chew and destroy things. The other myth is a little bit more complicated. It's that all bats carry rabies. And I'm sure you've all heard of the young man in 2019 that died of rabies through an injury that he obtained from a bat. That was only the second ever death by rabies in BC. Both of them, the other one was in 2003, and they were both caused by bats. In places like Quebec and Ontario, rabies is actually more commonly spread by raccoons or skunks, foxes than bats, but we don't have rabies in those animals here. Well, we don't have those animals on the island. Well, we do have raccoons, but they are not a cause of spreading rabies. But in terms of bats carrying rabies, only 0.1%, so that's 1 out of 1,000 bats are actually carrying rabies. And when they do get rabies, they get sick and die. It's not like they're just carrying it and asymptomatic and going on living their life, making everybody else sick. Everyone else they come into contact sick with it. So they don't live very long when they have rabies, but they are dangerous. And that is why there might be a chair up front there. And that is why the recommendation is do not ever handle a bat with bare hands. They are not aggressive or anything, not like a raccoon, for instance, where you come across a raccoon in the wild, it's like gonna hiss at you and maybe like, I don't know, get aggressive or something like that. A bat is not going to attack a human. The only time that it'll ever do anything is if you're actually trying to hold it. And if you do have a bat in your home, always wear gloves, long sleeves, protect yourself so that if you get a scratch, you'll have to go to the doctor and seek medical help in terms of potentially getting a rabies vaccination, because it is it's a fatal disease. Yeah, and the other thing, rabies vaccinations are actually, everyone maybe remembers in the past, it was a super painful procedure, but now it's a lot like getting a flu shot or a tetanus shot. It's a shot in the arm or in your thigh, and you know, it's manageable. So, but just keep in mind, in a place like Texas, where I think in the Austin area and where they have those bat caves that have millions and millions and millions of bats, and that they have a whole tourism industry around that, where tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people go to see these bats every year. They've never once had a person contract rabies from all those bats. So it is possible to live safely and to even be interested and observe bats in a totally safe manner. So yeah, just to keep that in mind. Okay, so ecosystem services is just a fancy word to say, how do bats help us and help the ecosystem at large? And there are several ways that they do that. One of them is pretty obvious. All of the bats that are in BC and on Vancouver Island, they're all insectivores, which means they exclusively eat insects. There are some other bats around globally that are pollinators, so they eat nectar and pollen, and others that even eat some small animals like frogs and mice and fish and stuff. But in BC, we only have insectivores. So that means they're really good at keeping our insect populations under control. One single little brown myotis, so this little brown bat, which there are many, many of them in this area, they can eat around 1,000 mosquitoes a night. One. That's a lot of mosquitoes. One colony of them then could remove 100,000 mosquitoes from the environment every night. So they're actually a benefit to have around. You would notice them if you had them and then all of a sudden they were gone. It would be itchy. The other thing that they do, which is just starting, there's some research that's starting to understand this dynamic, is that they nutrient cycle in forest ecosystems. So because they feed often over water, They eat all those bugs in that area, and then they come back to their roosting area and they poop. They poop all of that, and that adds nutrients into the forest. There is some research that the amount of nutrients that they deposit was making this tiny little patch of forest around their roost, like growing, I think, 10 times as productive as areas, 10 meters from it. So it's really interesting to show what they're contributing. And then there's another aspect where bats are a bioindicator, which means they can tell us just by studying bats and understanding their presence or absence, it can tell us about the health of an ecosystem. Just because they're really sensitive to any kind of disturbances. Okay, so I don't know how many of you are here because you probably or maybe think you have bats in your attic or in your barn. Any show of hands, people who maybe have bats? Awesome, okay. So you might either be totally comfortable with that, or you might be wondering, do I need to get rid of them? How do I get rid of them? Or that sort of thing. So, okay, do you want to get rid of your tiny tenants? I'm going to try to convince you that you don't need to, for the number one reason of insect control. But the other reason is the bat guano is good if you can clean it out. And these roost sites are critical habitat. Often when they're roosting inside an attic, it's a maternity site. So that's where they're having their pups because they like the fact that, like I said, the environment, the temperature of the environment is more stable than outdoors. And then there's also the aspect of if you have young people in your environment or in your community, it's a really great way for them to learn about bats. They're just really fascinated. Kids are really fascinated about bats. Okay, so, but it is important that the bats and the humans have separate living spaces. So your attic needs to be completely sealed off from where humans are living in the home. You want to make sure every single little crack is closed off. They can get through a space as big as 15 millimeters, or as small, I should say, which is a lot of caulking. But caulking works because they're not rats. So like close that up and it's good. And then the other issue that some people might have is the smell in their attic, potentially from the guano. But the guano itself isn't actually a means of disease transmission or anything. There's no histoplasmosis or hantavirus or anything associated with it in BC. So if you just want to leave it because you're never going into your attic, then that's okay too. This document right here is available on the BC Bats website. It's really helpful and it gives some pretty cool examples of places where they've decided to keep their bats. They're really big bat colonies, and the management practices that they're using to maintain them. Okay, so what if you do have to evict? Bats are a protected species in BC, so you're only allowed to do exclusion once they've left your home or your barn. I'm assuming your home. And then you just seal up all the cracks where they might be coming in, and then you should be good. It's a little bit of a problem if everyone did this. When the bats return in the spring, they might be really hard up for where are we going to have our pups now? I don't know. And the survival of pups for years, for I think 5 to 7 years, can actually be quite low because the loss of pup rearing habitat. But sometimes it's necessary.
Come back to the same place they were at last year.
Usually they do, yeah. Yeah.
Linda, when you have a question, can you repeat it so that people here can hear the question?
Sure. Okay. The question was, do they come back every year to the same place? And I said, yes. Generally they do, yes. Okay, so what are we doing in terms of collecting data on local bat populations? Oh, I wish I hadn't made it so dark, I'm sorry. There are two things that we do. One of them I mentioned previously is the bat counts. And that is something that pretty much anyone can do. If you have a bat roost, so a place where you know bats sleep during the day and they come out at night, and you know where their exit point is, you can do a bat count. All you have to do is come out right at sunset or when you know they're going to be exiting and just count them. It's so simple. And it gives us really valuable data because it tells us generally the abundance of different bats in one area. There's a whole, if you're interested in doing this on your property, I would love to connect with you because we need more of that data. We can also find out which bats you have. I have a little handy device called an echo meter, and it picks up their calls and it tells you the species. So that's really neat. And the other thing that we do is we test guano. So we get a little sample of their poop. We send it to a lab on the mainland, and that will give us a DNA analysis of which bat species you have. The other thing that we do, and we just started this last year, is acoustic monitoring. So we set out this little recorder you can see right here. It's this tiny little thing on a stick, and it picks up the bat calls and records them. And then we use a software and a biologist who has a good eye for looking at frequency, looking at these calls in terms of the patterns, and the software and the biologist are able to interpret each call for species. So that is something that we started last year. Let me see if I can show. Okay, well, first I'll talk about bat counts and then I'll talk about the acoustic monitoring. So in terms of bat counts, we have 4 sites in Qualicum, Bowser, Horn Lake. There are a lot of bats in Horn Lake. And there's some interesting bat species in one area of Qualicum, but we only have 4 sites that we're monitoring or that people are doing counts, so we could always use more people in that area. We have 1 site in Nanus. It's a woman who's had a maternity colony under her roof. It's like she doesn't even have an attic. They're just there every year, 500 of them. She can hear them. She thinks it's so cute. She can hear them jostling. There's really interesting social dynamics with some bat species. But people have been connecting with me. There are a few new roost sites. 2 sites in Nanaimo. One of them is a bat box that I put up at Diver Lake. And it's sort of used by the bats. They're like, well, I guess so. And another is just outside the Lindley Valley. Some big brown bats are using an attic. And then 3 sites in Cedar Yellow Point. 2 are at Wildwood, and 1 is very close to here. Okay, so not all species of bats will use human structures for roosting. There's actually, in our area, there aren't that many, like maybe half will use them. So there's some smaller species like little brown myotis, California myotis, and Yuma myotis who will use your attic, and they all kind of look the same and sound the same. And then there's a few of the larger ones called the big brown bat and the Townsend big-eared bat. Why are there so few counts in our region? That's because we don't know where the roosts are. Only people like you guys know where the roosts are, and we have to connect so that we can do these counts and collect this data. All right. Well, one reason that it's especially important right now that we get bat count data, especially because of the species of bats that use human structures for roosting. And one of them is the Myotis lucifugus, or the little brown bat. And it has been decimated, and I mean, more than that, it's been almost completely extirpated in some parts of North America. It started in like the eastern seaboard and has slowly spread across the continent. And when it does find these hibernation sites, because this bat, they might all roost in different spots in the summer, but in the winter, they seem to like to cluster in even bigger groups. And that is where they get this fungus while they're hibernating that grows on their bodies. And they have to wake up out of hibernation and wipe it off their bodies. And that takes so much energy from them that they basically just waste away and die in the process of hibernation. And it's killed, I think, 90 to 95% of these bats in different parts of North America. And it was found recently, it's been in Washington State for the last few years, and it was found in Alberta. So it's a question of when's it gonna come here? And so we would really like to know these, specifically these bat numbers here, so that we can get a sense of what might be happening to them, because we don't know that. I mean, there are so many things we don't know. We don't know where they go to hibernate. So we don't know where our bats, we know they're here in the summer, but we don't know where they go to hibernate. Are they going to the mainland? Are they finding somewhere on the island? Is it close to here? Is it really far from here? We just don't know. So it's good if we have some numbers from these bat counts and we can see if those numbers start to decline. It'll give us a sense of that this might have arrived. Okay. And the acoustic monitoring. Okay, so this is why we had to have the complicated setup, because we did set up recordings in a number of sites. I'm going to put this on the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust website soon. And it'll also be on the BC Community Bats Mid-Island page. But I would really like to get more sites. So last summer, we set up those acoustic monitoring stations on people's properties where we knew there were some bats and where we got permission from landowners. So some of them were parks and such like. And we just put the recorders out for 3 nights, and then any calls that are heard are analyzed. And we get, basically this is our map. Let's see if it'll open this for me, please. All right. Ooh. Okay. There's a lot going on my screen right now. Okay, so these little dots right here that you can see, can everyone see them? Okay, so we set out the recorders, and the bigger the dot, the more bats were heard. So here's the one in Qualicum, where we have a threatened species, a blue listed species, the Townsend big-eared bat. So we wanted to know where are they going, and there was actually a specific roost set up for them because they were in a barn, and that barn was torn down, and so they built the special thing that they thought they would really like, and it turns out they don't really like it. So they're just like a block down the road in someone's barn. Anyways, okay, so if I click on that, where can I move it? It gives, okay, how do I move this? Okay, it gives over here all these different bat species. And it tells you, for instance, Townsend's, how many, the average calls, 2.7, not a lot, obviously. At least there were some calls, but it's telling you nobody's roosting close by. But here's the California myotis, and then little brown myotis, Yuma myotis. Our biologist wanted to put sort of a caveat saying that some of these calls are really similar. So he doesn't have like 100% confidence that they're all California myotis and not Yuma myotis. But basically it gives you a pretty good picture of what's there. If I can just move. So look at, here's the wildwood. And if I can zoom in. So we set these out. You can see right on the lake, there's a bat box right here. And they really like that spot. there's not a lot of trees in the area to get in their way. Whereas areas that are more treed have less bats. So the proximity to water and then space for them to fly where there's not a lot of, as you could say, clutter in terms of trees is problematic, even though they're really good flyers. So I'm going to put this up. Anyone who's interested can have a look at it. Okay. And if you have any sites to recommend, if you think they're on your property or somewhere nearby where we can put up these recorders, it'll give us more data, because there's not that much for this area. I'm pretty sure there's a lot more that we can find out about this area. How do I? Okay, here are a few of our so bad. Here are some shadowy pictures of our local bats. If you can see it on my screen, it's so beautiful. So some of them they have really different habits than others. And so it's interesting to see that we have these different species here. For instance, the big brown bat is perfectly happy. It's like the most common, most abundant bat in North America because it's happy living in an urban environment and in a human-built environment. It's still able to make a living. It doesn't seem to be too bothered too much by noise or light or all those things that other bat species really hate. For instance, the hoary bat. The hoary bat is a solitary bat, so it doesn't like to live in groups, and it prefers to be in forest. It'll roost in a tree. I don't know if you've ever thought like, well, where did bats roost before they roosted in my attic? And actually they will roost in, if you ever look in an old tree, there's these peeling bits of bark that are just sort of pulling off of the tree. They'll roost right under there. They can just tuck in under there. You can even see little clusters of them sometimes. So if you're ever walking in the forest, just sort of peek, peek when you see a really good tree. They also like really old trees that have those crevices where they can get inside, where you think, oh, that might be nice for a mink or something. The bats will use those too, if there is no marten or mink using it. And oh, this is a bat species, the hoary bat. It actually is known to be a migrator, whereas others are hibernators. So it will leave here and come back. We don't know where it goes. That's another thing we don't know. Okay, and the long-legged myotis, this is another one. It only roosts in trees and rock crevices and prefers to be in the forest. So when we have a lot of these in these areas, it's telling us something about sort of the density of the forest and the habitat needs, that we're actually meeting their needs here, which is a good thing to see. Mm-hmm.
Think of that being in caves. We find them at Horn Lake.
Okay, so the question was, do we find bats at Horn Lake in the caves? It's my understanding they have protected those caves now, in terms of making sure that you're not bringing in potentially the white nose syndrome, the fungus that causes white nose syndrome. But they don't know where the bats are roosting or if they're roosting in there or hibernating in there. It's assumed that bats prefer to hibernate in caves because of the temperature staying stable. But we don't know where they are hibernating. In fact, there's increasing interest by scientists in the winter activities of bats because more people are reporting that they are seeing bats actively foraging in November or February, or all these times where it's like, what are they doing? So it's assumed that it might be possible on the island and in BC that some of these bats have a completely different hibernation cycle than they might have in other parts of North America. And that might potentially protect them from white nose syndrome because they're not hibernating as deeply, but this is all just speculation. So, okay. And here's the, oh. He's so cute. He has these big ears. The Townsend Big Ears bat. So why is it a threatened species? Like a lot of these bats that we have here, they aren't considered threatened, but that's also partially because we don't know enough about how many there are and where they are. So they might actually be on a decline. But the Townsend Big-Eared bat is known to be threatened, and that is because it really, it's primarily a moth eater. It doesn't like any, can you see that?
Is that worse? Better.
Mildly better. They need really good cover of darkness. So a lot of bats will come out as soon as it starts to get dark. These guys will wait at least an hour and a half later and come out later. They also have this weird way that they hunt. They glean the bugs off of plants. So they sort of flap around. They're slower flyers, they're quieter, and they'll be picking bugs off plants. Whereas a lot of other bats will just grab the bugs on the wing and hunt that way. So here's the silver-haired bat, which is also solitary and migratory and prefers old growth forest. But we did get a number of silver hairs throughout our areas where we monitored the acoustic monitoring. So I thought that was really interesting. I do wonder sometimes the ones that we hear, we hear X number of silver, is that just the same bat flying around and just call it like really busy that night? Yeah, and the California myotis, which looks a lot. I mean, it's really hard. Scientists, they have to be holding the bat to tell a California myotis from a little brown myotis. So it's just like the teeth or something very small. Okay, and here. How you can help. Ooh. How do I make this so that it's more visible? Okay, so why is it doing that? Yeah, I don't know. It seems to have like just sort of cut it off. If you see bats in your area, you can potentially put a bat box up. A lot of people say, oh, I want bats in my neighborhood or something. Can I put up a bat box and that'll bring the bats to my neighborhood? And it's like, no. Sadly, it's not like a bird feeder. The bat box will only be used by bats if they are in the area. So they're really effective if you want to sort of move them from your attic to somewhere else. They might choose to use the bat box. Or if you just have forest and maybe potentially not that much roosting sites because the forest is young or whatever, putting a bat box you might suddenly have lots of bats using that box. And also in terms of habitat, like I said, just try not to evict. You can also you can garden for bats, I guess is what you could do, which basically means planting night flowering plants. So that'll attract moths to your night flowering plants, and the moths will attract the bats. Or if you have bats, the moths will be very thankful. And then be careful about pesticide use because that is transmitted up the food chain. But probably the most important is reporting bat observations because like I've said many times in this presentation, we're just lacking so much data. And so any observation is helpful in terms of filling in our data gaps. And if you know where there's a roost, that's especially helpful because then we can do a count at that site potentially. And volunteer. So there isn't yet there's a designation through the BC Community Bat Program for a bat-friendly community. You can be certified as a bat-friendly community. You have to follow a bunch of steps, fulfill those steps, and then you can get this designation. There hasn't yet been one in our area, so that would be really neat if someone was interested in pursuing that. But yeah. And lastly, the BC Community Bat Program is hosting a Bat Ambassador training, which is just a lot more detailed information than what I gave today. And it is happening on the 21st from 7 to 9 p.m. So if you're interested, just send me an email and I will link you up. Okay, I think that's everything. Should I stop sharing now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your time and thank you. And I want to say thank you to NOHA and to Yes for inviting me to speak. I'm really interested in the Cedar area and it's great that.
So you can close the meeting chat.
Okay.
Don't close the laptop down. People still watching you. You can
Okay.
lights off again maybe and then.
I'm trying to figure. Okay.
So little arrow, see where it says meeting chat? Tiny arrow there, just shut, close.
There we go. Okay. Were there any questions?
Question about performance. You said that it's red and they're hibernating. And it takes a lot of energy to clean that off. Is it toxic to them or is it just that drain of energy when they're coming out of hibernation?
It's my understanding that it's, oh, sorry. So it was the question was about white nose syndrome and the fungus that is on the bats when they're hibernating and whether it's toxic to them or whether it actually just drains their energy stores while they're hibernating. And my understanding is that it drains their stores while they're hibernating.
And then you said closing some of the caves in Horn Lake. Do people transmit that fungus into those caves?
Well, it's possible that we could track it in on our shoes or other ways that we might bring it into the caves. Yeah, they're just not sure. Yes.
How far do bats fly from their roosts to catch mosquitoes?
The question was, how far do bats fly from their roost to catch mosquitoes? I think it depends on the bat species, but I think for most of the smaller bats, they aren't going to range much further than 1 kilometer or 2, although I can't say for certain.
When you say they return in the spring, it's March 13th. Are they returning now? Is it 5 weeks?
I haven't seen any bats. Has anyone seen any? You've seen them already? The bigger one. So, I mean, all of this information, that more that we can get, the more of a picture it fills in for us. Because it might be that this area is actually quite specific, or it might fit the patterns of other places in terms of what these bats do when they're coming up, when they're hibernating, when they're coming out of hibernation. Yeah.
You commented on the things that apply to bats, and it sounded like but there's a lot of controversy around what bat houses do. Can you talk about it?
Okay, so the question was about which bat houses are appropriate and attracting bats. I think generally the recommendation is to have a bat house that will allow the temperature so that will allow the bats to sort of have different areas where the temperature might be different. So if you have a very small single chambered bat box, if it gets hot in there, there's nowhere for the bats to go. They might try to go higher or lower or something like that, but the temperature will be the same. There are multi-chambered bat boxes, and then there's this one called a rocket box, which sort of faces all directions. And it gives the bats an opportunity if, say, the sun is shining on one side of the bat box, if it gets really hot on that side, they can shuffle to the other side where it's a bit cooler. And they will do that. The other thing is the size for maternity boxes. So a single chambered bat box isn't recommended as a maternity box. So I think there's multi-chambered boxes or double-chambered, 4-chambered boxes are the ones that, I mean, they can really house, I think, up to 300 bats. And moms will raise their pups in them. They prefer an attic because it's safer from predators. The other issue is if you have a cat. Cats have been known, if they know where a roost is, they'll just wait and just completely kill them off. It's like sport for them, or I'm not quite sure. And so if you have an attic, say where the exit is a spot where a cat can just sit and lie in wait for everybody to come out, that might not be the best thing. It might actually be better to have a bat box where they have a space where they can exit the box and not be picked off by your cat. Yeah. Yes?
More of a, something I'd just like to share here in my neighborhood, Yellow Point, this general area where we live. We'll get when you notice the swallows show up, you'll notice that the mosquitoes show up. Then the swallows, they go away. Well, we can open our doors and have our screen doors open at our house quite through the summer. But Gina and I travel to our cottage in Nova Scotia, and that cottage was in our family since the 40s, and they've lost all the bats, 95% of them in Nova Scotia. And you would believe the mosquitoes that are at that cottage now. You cannot sit on that porch when night comes. You got to be inside and have really good screens because there are thousands of mosquitoes at every screen window that's open. And so just wanted to kind of convey that because I've got a little bit of experience. Have a few bats around our house, not that many. But I can tell you that really quite important to our lifestyle that we keep the bats because we sure as hell don't want to have mosquitoes that forgot puppies. It's crazy. So thank you. I have a question from Mitzi McFarlane asking, is it a concern if you see a bat flying around during the day? Can you repeat?
Is it a concern if you see a bat flying around during the day? Not always. It could just be a pup trying to figure out how to fly, or they're just trying to sort out a roost. Like there are some bat species, especially the forest dwellers, they don't always roost at the same spot, so they're just sort of moving around, and maybe the spot that they picked wasn't really such a good spot, and so they're just trying to find something more comfortable. But it could be a sign of a sick bat. So yeah.
Okay, and I got another question. Jacqueline Shirk says, I have a bat box on a hydropole here in LC. Are there any bats known to be here in LC? I don't know where LC is. Maybe someone does know.
Lake Cowichan.
Bats in Lake Cowichan?
Yeah, Lake Cowichan, yes.
I think, yeah, I would think there are, although I don't know anything about the bat counts done there. I know that I've been in contact with a few people from Lake Cowichan who wanted to put up bat boxes. I would assume that the habitat is much the same as our region, so.
It's a little rural. And so, I live in a forested area, lots of 100-foot trees around my property. So I bought a bat box. Oh, you can't? Oh, just a minute. Okay. You can't hear me?
Jacqueline unmutes. You ask her to unmute. She can actually talk to you.
Okay.
This, it makes it work.
Can you unmute?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Oh, am I muted?
She's got.
Oh, I don't know why. I'm sorry.
I can hear you.
You can?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So I bought a bat box at a store in Surrey called Wild Birds Unlimited. So it's a nice bat box. It's not painted or anything. And I got it installed on the hydro pole at 15 feet because I think that's what it recommended. It still seems a little low to me. I wonder if it shouldn't have been higher, but I don't know. It's been up for 2 years and I can't tell if there's bats in it, but I don't really see bats here. I just think it's a good place for bats. Why aren't bats here?
Well, I can tell you that we did the same in Lindley Valley in Nanaimo. The biologist that I was working with, Trudy Chapman, she said, there's gotta be bats here. Let's just put a box up.
Can you summarize what she was saying?
So she was saying that are you living in Cowichan? Is that what?
Lake
or-
Cowichan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like-
it's pretty rural.
And she got a decent box that she purchased, and she put it up on a hydro pole. It's 15 feet high, and she can't tell if there are bats in it or not. And so she's wondering. Have you ever seen guano under the bat box? That's one way to tell.
That would be a good indicator, but I do not. So I
Okay.
don't think it's inhabited.
Yeah, it might take a while for them if they are in the area to want to use it. Otherwise, they just don't want to use your bat box. You don't have to take it down though. You never know.
No, I leave it up. But so moths being nighttime pollinators, aren't they?
Yeah.
Is there a list of plants that you would consider would be, some plants just close up at night?
There is a list. I can put it up on the Mid-Island site on the BC Community Bat
That would be good to know.
website.
Linked to
Guy.
that box.
Yeah.
We think it's not occupied, but a friend said if you smear it with the guano, the bats might think it's home. Is that true or myth?
I have no idea. I do not know.
I'm getting some guano.
Chess. That's up there. The guano's-
Yeah, the guano is really tiny. It does look like mouse droppings.
Okay, good to know. I thought it would be more like
There's so much exoskeleton from the insects. So it's kind of shiny metallic looking mouse droppings. Anyways,
Melinda Scott says, thank you, very informative session. I will be in touch as I have multiple roosts. We're on a very large pond and want to offer to host an acoustic station and or account.
oh, that would be great.
Don't know where she is.
Are there, other than domestic cats, are there other predators that maybe put into play in where you put your bat box?
I would think owls are also predators of bats, but that I don't think they'll kill off a whole colony like a cat can.
Mm.
A lot of people who call me, they're like, I have a bat in my house and it's dead. And I don't know where it came from. And 99.9% of the time I asked, do you have a cat? And I'm like, yep. I'm like, well, it's probably your cat. It was the cat, but they should still talk to the doctor, and it gets all complicated like that. So there are ways that you can make it so that your cat is less likely to be able to predate bats, but it's tricky. It's better to, sorry, bell. Well, that works for birds. I'm not sure if belling works for. Yeah.
So we're from Saltaire, so not far away, and we had a few evenings last summer with bats. Do you think that means it's worth part of the bat box, or that was just, how many passing by? There may be more evenings. I generally know a few evenings. So,
Are you near water? Okay.
Saltwater.
Are you near? Oh, well, there are quite a few bats on the Gulf Islands. So
It's mixed water, it's salt
Yeah.
water, it's right on the lagoon depth.
yeah. I don't know. It would be interesting to have. It's called an echometer, and you can pop it onto your iPhone. It's a little bit pricey, but if you really are interested in bats, or you have like young friends, little kids, they will just be walking around with it all night. It makes bats a lot more interesting to be able to tell. It might be that they're the solitary species. If there's forest around, they might just be sort of using the area. They range a little bit further, I think, the solitary species.
Is there sound easily heard?
Well, when you have the echometer, you can hear it. It sounds like, oh, I wish I had my phone. I do have my phone. But it sounds like a bunch of clicks. I don't know if I need to have my computer on. Let me just go far enough.
posting on that one.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me just first see if I can play the recordings.
Do they only make sound when they're flying?
Well, they do make, so a lot of people who had them in their attic, they tell me they do like chirp at each other a lot. So you can hear those. So they do vocalize that way. But when they're echolocating, that is a frequency that we can't hear.
Other First Nation stories about bats. You know?
I do not know that. That would be very interesting to hear from local First Nations on that subject. Okay. Was there another question too? Yeah. Right. So are they sort of under your shingles or are they in the attic? Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's just like the Nanus house is exactly like that too. Huh. They must prefer that. I don't know. Maybe the metal. I don't know. Oh, does someone else have one too? Okay, sorry. Do you want to play yours? Yeah. If you make yours quiet, mine's different from yours. Okay. Okay. It's like a chirpier, a little bit chirpier than yours was more clickier. Let me see. And that bat is the hoary bat, so that's one of the solitary ones. It gets confused with the silver-haired bat, which is also a solitary one in terms of its call. Anyways, it's really neat. If you have, it's $250 though. Or I can come out and I can lend it to you. I've got one that I can lend out. The more information we have, the more we know. So, yep.
So part of the reason I'm here is because, as you've all heard, I am quite interested in keeping the bats in our neighborhoods. And I understand we've got a bat colony right upstairs from us. And so I'm wondering, what are we going to do to protect it, or what is the consensus? What's the neighborhood think about having bats in their community hall? Yeah, that's what I was hoping to hear.
Can you talk a little bit? So the question was, what are we doing in this area to protect the bats, specifically this building, which it has, I think, am I allowed to talk about this? Yeah. Okay. There was someone who came here to count last year, and there's one exit that they're coming from. And then you might have noticed if you walk around, there are a lot of boxes, and they were just counting the exit from the attic, which is a single exit, unlike yours, which has like 20 different exits. He stopped counting at 950. And so it would be nice to do a proper count of the attic and the boxes around. And to have them ID'd for species. So we're hoping even to put cameras in so we can understand when they're coming, when they're going, potentially how many pups there are, maybe even learn a little bit more about their behavior. But we're getting information from other groups about what's the best camera that doesn't disturb them. That we can also check in on them instead of wait until the end of the summer and then, you know, not know what's going on until the end of the summer. So yeah. And we'll have echo meters, so you can hear them call as they're exiting. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any contacts on Fetus Island? I've heard that there are a number of people who are bad lovers.
I think they have their own group.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so that's not in your jurisdiction or?
No, I know even Gabriola, they have their own group too, that they're just a really keen group of people who want to do everything they can. So.
So over 30 years ago, when I lived in Saltaire, there was a big population of cats there. So every night down at the beach, we see them. And my landlord had a matic with a huge rat.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, how long is it? People from the community were telling me that this building, I don't know if it's this building that's been renovated or, I mean, this has been here for 100 years or more. Yeah, and it's always had bats. Is that true?
I think so.
Yeah.
When they did the reno, it was a little bit different. So down in the wall, it was just as much guano as we collected back in the attic. It was that much more in the wall.
Wow.
So they've been here for at least probably 80 years. Or more. I think the accumulation problem, but the first thing that then and thing that one more time. So I think what's up there is probably about 20 years.
Yeah. And it's thoroughly separated from any human used area. So it's,
And the nice thing about it, you do have breedings of starlings and not can't get into that female and the starlings are designated. So just the breedings small enough that's fast to get to starlings and cats. And
did anyone else want to speak?
We have John, who's going to talk a little bit about the guano. He's actually prepared a really good handout on how it can be used. John is ready.
Oh, here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I noticed that I was introduced as a bat enthusiast who's going to talk about guano. This is an introduction I've been waiting all my life for. Bat guano is a true organic natural fertilizer. Other fertilizers you may get will probably have animal antibiotics and all sorts of things in them. Bat guano is not in this case. And when you think about all those little bodies that are in there, when you examine the guano, let's bring a bag over here. I'm not going to run my fingers through it. Well, when you look at it, you realize it's just hundreds of little tiny pellets. and each one of those pellets is probably 10 or 15 mosquitoes all ground up. As a fertilizer, it is rated as in the NPK scale as 10-3-1. That's 10% nitrogen, 3% potash, and phosphorus, and 1% potash. So the 3 and the 1 aren't going to do an awful lot for you, but the 10%, and actually it varies between 7 and 10% depending on how dry it is. If it's very fresh, you'll get 10%. The drier material like this is probably more like 7 or 8. Doesn't really matter. And the thing about this is that it's actually quite a strong nitrogen fertilizer. We think of nitrogen fertilizers being, like urea, which is 56%, or the overdone Scott's lawn fertilizer, which is 38 and 40%. But for the most part, that's wasted because it has to dissolve and a lot of it runs off. But with this material, it very quickly releases the nitrogen molecules. So that, and a lot of it, and because of all the little bits and pieces with it, it is taken up by the plants quite easily. And because it's taken up quite easily, it potentially can burn the plant if you give it too much. So less is more in this case, very much so. On the little printout I did, I went into some of the applications, and right now probably the best application is to use it as a soil conditioner. And as a soil conditioner, you can add 2 to 5 pounds per cubic yard of soil. Well, that's kind of hard to figure out. A cubic yard of soil is actually rather a lot. If you want to do it on basis of making a potting soil or something like that, then you're looking at 3 heat tablespoons per gallon of soil. So one of your black pots that you're going to use for plants, 3 heat tablespoons is plenty, and mix it up well, and it has very little smell. Your cat produces more smell than this bat guano will. You can use it for the other thing you can do is make a sort of a tea out of it, or an extract for houseplants in particular, by infusing a tablespoon of guano per liter of warm water, and you soak it for about 12 hours. And then you add 1 tablespoon of that infusion per 4-inch pot. Okay, so you can figure out based on the size of your pot how much to use. And you do it after you have watered. You water first, then you put on the fertilizer, because by watering first, the infusion will enter the soil and be taken up much quicker than if you just plunk it into the pot. The only thing about this is that you have to use it right away. You cannot store it because it'll start to grow bacteria and fungus. And if you've ever seen cat litter that's been left to fester, you get some real interesting growth in there. I've never experimented with that, but don't store it. The other thing you can use is put it into your compost heap. As you're turning it, everybody turns their compost heap, don't they? Yes. And as you turn it, you can just sprinkle it in. And again, I think, what did I say the rate was here? 1 to 2 pounds per cubic yard. Well, that's 3 by 3 by 3. So most compost bins, if those round ones, that will be less than half a yard. So you just need a little sprinkle in there to help activate the bacteria. And what this is going to do is feed the bacteria in your compost that helps break everything down. You can also use it as a top dressing in plants and on pots, and that is at a rate of 1 teaspoon per gallon of soil once per month. Okay, anything more than that, you're either going to risk burning the plant or just waste the waste the guano because it won't be taken up. So that's pretty much the sum total of the applications and so on. It's just a word about storage and handling. Obviously a cool, dry place, because you don't want this to get moist and start to, the bacteria to start to grow. With all fertilizer, you should use gloves, whether it's bat guano or the stuff you buy in boxes from the store. You should not be handling fertilizer because it can burn your skin. It can be absorbed through the skin. So you should always wear a glove or protect yourself when you're handling fertilizer. A pair of gloves and washing your hands, and then keep it away from children and pets, fairly obviously, and avoid breathing the dust. And again, you don't want to breathe any kind of fertilizer dust, and it's the same with this. So I've got this handout, which will be given with each bag or with each purchase of the bat guano, which is from upstairs. If you see little pieces of white in it, it's paper insulation. Okay, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's just paper. We tried to sift it out, but there are little bits still in it. And for most people, for most average size suburban gardens, 1 or 2 kilos is going to be plenty for the entire summer growing season. Thank you very much.
Bruce.
So I'm not here to talk about bats. Apologies for this, but I just wanted to take advantage of the group here and let you know that the North Oyster Fire Department and the Cowichan Valley Regional District are going to be hosting a meeting here on the 30th of March at 6 p.m. to talk about Fire Smart. So fire season is just around the corner, and Fire Smart is about